Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Partner Web Conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Tech Talk. Today's topic, Performance Benchmark for Dynamics 365. My name is Janice and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to be a part of a recorded session, we ask that you please disconnect now. Attendees may access the web conference recording within 72 hours via the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We do have presenters standing by to answer your questions throughout the session. Now moving on to the presentation, presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Senior R&D Solution Architect, Christopher Lim, and joining Christopher is also Senior R&D Solution Architect, Jeff Liu. So without any further delay, Christopher, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Janice. All right, welcome everyone for this tech talk on performance benchmark. So within Fast Track, we've made already several tech talks around performance because this is really a critical topic for any implementation of Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. We did one to help you defining your testing approach for performance. We did another regarding the troubleshooting tools that are available in the standard solution. We did another on the key patterns and edit patterns. And now we're closing the series with this one on performance benchmark. It was one of the top demand actually. So today, what we are going to cover specifically is how you would define your approach for the performance benchmark. There is preparation to think about, and most of the time, the critical scenarios will not be targeted, so the performance benchmark will not be optimal. We're going to share with you some real-life experience, and actually we're going to cover in more detail a demonstration of the Perf SDK. Jeff is going to do a demonstration to show you how you can rapidly use it for this. Keep in mind that we're not going to cover any external use of ASV solutions. We know that exists in the field. We're not going to cover the automated testing with the regression suite automation tool. We're going to share links and resources at the end of the tech talk for that. And similarly, it's not going to cover any retail or on-premise RBD deployment aspects. So the agenda is rather simple. We're going to take 15 minutes to review what's a performance benchmark, what would be a good approach, an efficient approach for preparing and delivering a performance benchmark, and some recommendations so that you avoid some pitfalls and you follow good practices. Then Jeff will take the rest of the hour to demonstrate the Perf SDK with a real situation. So the performance benchmark, it's quite clear for most of our customers and partners. It's the simulation of the workload, interactive workload, so concurrent users, to verify what is the performance for a specific workload. Yes. In reality, it's very important to focus on the objectives for the performance benchmark. What are the reasons why you would do a performance benchmark? And in the end, you're coming back to business questions. The solution that you have implemented, you want to be sure that it will be able to handle real-life workload and not just, a few records that you're creating in your test environment. It could be that you also want to simulate the 1,000 users that you will actually have in 6 months or so. In some cases, and for multi-phase projects, you could also see that at the beginning, there is very limited data in your production environment. In 3 years, you expect a very high growth of the database, and you want to make sure that it will perform as good as today. Another very common case where performance benchmark is very valuable is when you're going to have multiple countries for the rollout. And you will start with a small one. So it will have limited number of users, limited number of transactions. And now you want to be sure that the solution is optimized for larger countries where you may have 10 times more users, 10 times more transactions. In the end, we're coming back to this critical point is that the performance benchmark, it will give you evidence that whatever you have built with specific customizations, specific ISV solutions, and a specific configuration, it can achieve the business objectives of the business. The performance objectives of the business. So you will confirm that all those critical processes for your company with targeted transactions and users volume, they will be able to perform within an acceptable duration and response time. So the outcome and the result, it's usually three main things. It's going to be a performance benchmark report where you will see the different scenarios, like so, different sales orders flow, for example, or a stock verification, a price verification. And you will see through the different iterations how they perform for a number of users. In this case, for example, we had 100 users simulated, and we could see that initially, after first iteration, it took 9 minutes to perform the sys order flow at the same time as the other sys order flows. With the benchmark, we could identify bottlenecks, performance issues, troubleshoot them, fine-tune the solution, and come back in iteration 2 and 3 to better results. So that at the end, all the critical scenarios for the business were achieving the objectives, less than 3 minutes. So at the end, you will get a report showing that you have achieved the objectives, and you have the list of issues that was covered and the optimizations performed. And that's really the essence of the performance benchmark, to have this set of evidence. Depending on your need, you may do the performance benchmark quite early in the project, during the project, or even after go live. For example, if you want to really validate the standard solution and its capabilities, you could do it during the analysis phase. If you want to actually test the ISV solution, you could do it during the design and development phase because you have already the solution from the ISV. You could do it as part of performance testing to confirm that the final solution, which is the standard blocks from Microsoft, the ISVs potentially, the customizations and the configuration, they are achieving your business objectives. Or you could do it after go live, like the case I was mentioning, when you have multiple phases or you have multiple countries to roll out. For the methodology, it's very important to really think about how to approach the benchmark. We see sometimes in the projects we work with that the project manager will just ask a technical lead to do a performance benchmark, and he will directly start on scenarios that he thinks are relevant, and he will start fine-tuning with no specific target, leading to, in the end, no result whatsoever. So having an approach that is focused on what the business considers critical is very, very important. You're going to focus on their objectives, what is important for them in terms of processes, what would be the objective in terms of performance, so the duration of the process, the maximum response time of the interaction. You would list, prioritize the scenarios to then prepare them. If you have the right scenarios, you can then work on the right preparation aspects, meaning creating the test scripts. If you need specific data in the system first, it means data expansion script. If you have a set of scenarios that are going to require horsepower, it would mean a specific environment, possibly a tier 4, a tier 5. And as you have done the preparation, you have the right scenarios, you have the right test scripts, the environment is prepared, you can then execute the tests, analyze the results, and iteratively tune the system, tune the solution, until you have achieved the performance objectives. If you don't have those targets set, then you never know when to stop. So once you have achieved all the objectives, you have actually confirmed that the solution will be able to perform the workload requested by the business, and you will work on the report. So when you're doing a performance benchmark, you're actually focusing a lot more on interactive workload. So concurrent users doing a specific process or multiple processes at the same time. But to make it even more real life, what you could do is add other types of workload, like a batch job that would post or do incremental MRP workloads. You could also add integration that would happen post go live and during the working hours. Simulation of reporting and analytics workload. This would give you really a day in a life testing scenario, testing situation. We want to make it real because in the end, after go live, it's exactly what's going to happen. The different users will have different contexts. So there will be a transaction mix happening at the same time on production, a different load pattern, and even at the device level, at the client level, there will be specific characteristics like in the network. So this concurrent workload, you want to ensure that it will not break your environment or whatever you have built. For example, as you're going to troubleshoot, if you detect any NT pattern, you could directly work on that. What we recommend now to our customers is to watch this tech talk that Davey presented on the key patterns and key NT patterns so that you can already see if you're following the good practices or if some of your designs are following the wrong practices. One common problem that we see with partners who want to do a benchmark and who wants to start using the Perf SDK is that they don't really know how to prepare it. So we're going to share with you, as part of this tech talk, a simple template to quick start so that you can quickly capture the different scenarios and also the starting data point. So for example, here we'll have for each line the different scenarios and the important data to capture, their priority if they are peak hour, meaning happening during the working hours, the type of workload if it's been customized, number of concurrent users, and other things like the target duration, target response time, things like that. And for the starting data point, it's going to be a set of entities that would be needed as a baseline in your system, meaning that you need to write data expansion scripts to get that. So it will be a simple template that you can use and enrich for your own benchmarks. And the link will be put in the Tech Talk page on Infopedia. The final critical aspect for the performance benchmark is really that it's an iterative process. Most of the time, the project managers will allocate just one iteration to do a sort of validation of the performance, but it's just not enough. You're going to have multiple loops, multiple iterations to basically identify the bottlenecks, if actually the scenario is running or not, if there's a few or many calls, if there's a very obvious issue to fix, you will then work on the prioritized issues to develop a fix or request it to Microsoft if it's a standard bug, or to the ISVs. You will get those fixes and you will test again. In the report, you will then see if now you can achieve the objective or not. And if not, of course, you will start again until you have met the performance objectives. So when you're planning the performance benchmark, always keep in mind that you will have multiple iterations, unless you're 100% sure that all you have in the solution is perfect. Finally, on the activities, so we have listed them, it will be very important to set the proper responsibility. The most important point being that all the scenarios should be provided by the customer, by the business, what is important for them, so that you focus on the right scenarios and that you prepare the right tests in the end. A few recommendations as you're doing your performance benchmark. I said it already, but do define the approach thoroughly. Understand the usage patterns before you start doing the testing. Understand the goals of this performance benchmark so that you do it at the right time with the right scenarios on the right environment, and know also the tools and the licensing requirements that are needed. So for example, the Visual Studio licenses, and even if you want, for example, a specific environment, a tier 4, tier 5, that would be an add-on. And you need to prepare that. And continuing on the environment, you need to make sure that you're going to select the right tier that will have sufficient power to cover the transactions mix and the number of users, simulated users. Also, as you have your scenarios, define really what would be the minimum data needed in the system, whether it's configuration, master, transactions, historical, to plan time for that. You may need consultants to help you. You may need people from business or some data migration to happen first. So to make sure to consider that data preparation. And as you're preparing the test scripts, make sure that they work in a single user mode first, multiple times to confirm that your tests are fully ready. Never assume that performance is only Microsoft's responsibility, because when you're doing an implementation, you're indeed using the Microsoft standard solution, the infrastructure with the environments, the standard solution. But in the end, you're adding a ton of building blocks on top of that. Customizations, ISVs, configurations, even the type of devices being used could lead to issues. So do make sure that whenever you have performance issue, you consider where it could come from, the different sources. So Microsoft or the ISV or the building blocks created by the implementation team. In the cloud world, keep in mind that Microsoft is going to do the sizing for the production environment. So if you were considering a performance benchmark to do the sizing, it's not necessary. Another misconception is that in the cloud, we have unlimited resources. It is not true. A bad design will not provide good performance. If you expect that the process can run in multiple threads, and in the design it's mono-threaded, there's not much that can be done in the cloud. The final point is the most important. You cannot use the production environment to do performance benchmark or any performance testing. It will need to be done on a tier 2, 3, 4, 5, but on a non-production environment. In production, what you will be able to do is a final validation of your processes, following the go-live preparation. And that's it. So now Jeff is going to show you the Perf SDK in real life. And Jeff, I leave you the screen.
Thank you, Christopher. Let me share my screen. I think you should be able to see my screen now. So I'm going to demonstrate the Perform SDK, but there's some of things I cannot able to demo it. First of all, is that I'm not able to demo like how you're going to pick up your scenario, how you're going to define your scenario, how you're going to define your performance goal, because it's totally up to your customer's business case. And you also need to talk with your customer and understand, hey, when you run the performance testing, how many of the history data, how many of the peak transaction volume you need to test against it, and also where you can get those configuration data, who is going to load the master data for the testing, those stuff. So you need to working with your customer, working the project team and finalize. And this step by step, majorly is assume you already have those scenario, goal, transaction, configuration, history data, those activity already done, and then you are ready to capture the scenario and convert the scenario to a test script, and eventually convert the test script to a multiple user testing, run the testing, tuning it, add models, tuning it, and then eventually reach out your acceptable performance goal and conclude and report it. So the first one will be that define and capture your scenario. Normally, you need to working with your business user and capture those scenario with a task recorder step by step. And then you will move to the environment preparation. The environment involved in here will be the development environment as well as your performance testing environment. So the performance testing environment could be a tier 2, could be a tier 3, or tier 4, or tier 5. It depends on the concurrent user you want to test, any peak transaction volume you need to handle it during the test. And eventually you will convert that task record you capture for the scenario in the step 1 as the C# performance script. And then you will validate with the single user to make sure the script itself is working as expected, and it does do what you expect the script, to perform in the system. Then you will first to convert that single user test script to the multiple user to be ready for the load test. Then eventually, when you run the test, then let's say you want to run the thousands of the concurrent users to a particular of the scenario or multiple of the scenario. You most likely you are going to do a single of the execution. Always just go to your target of the volume. You probably want to start at 100 concurrent user first, and then move to the 500, and then first move to 800, then probably move to the 1500 users, just like this. So basically, you just add workloads incrementally. And eventually, you're going to run a multiple iteration together, work together with the Turing process in each of the iteration, and eventually you can reach the goal, and then you can pull out those data and make the summary report and show it to your customer management team or whoever's care about those the benchmarking output, and give the confidence to the team. Hey, this is what you can achieve with your current testing, and give the team the confidence you are ready for the go live, or you are ready to roll out some of the big company or country or whatever of the your test for. So let's now jump to the demonstration. So the first step, as we mentioned, that you need to identify the scenario, you need to capture the scenario. To capture the scenario, basically you are going to use the task record. So to do the task record, basically you go to the FO environment. You can do it in your dev environment. You can do it in your the performance testing environment, but just make sure you have the same data in there, so you can reuse those those process and those configuration. Also, you need to make sure you have the same copy of the code base in the environment. And basically, you just go to the gear and then click on the task recorder. It will show up the task recorder screen. And then basically, you go to the create a recorder. You say, OK, this is my scenario. Let's say perfect tech talk. And then you hit start. Once you hit the start, you basically go to your, based on the scenario, you just go to the screen, walk through your step by step, and enter your testing data in there. Once you're done, then basically you just come in here to say, hey, and stop. Once you stop it, you will have the option to say, OK, I'm going to download this task recorder as the developer recording. So once you download it, basically you will get the XML file. For example, in my case, I already record 2 of the scenario and download the developer record for the to be ready, for the next step. Then once you're done in here, then you will go to your development box. You will first going to convert the task recorder or developer recording as the single user of the task. So what you're going to do is that basically you come in the, we should still make sure you run as the administrator. So if you purely just want to run the single user testing, you can do it without the administrator permission. But if you want to run the load testing with multiple users, then eventually you will need to have the administrator permission to the dev environment itself. So from a single user perspective, single user testing perspective, you can do it in the Microsoft mentioned tier 1 environment. But for the load testing, you need to bring in that cloud host environment in order to get the administrator access. Okay, to convert the developer recording, basically you just go to the Dynamics 365 add-ins and then click on that create C# perf test from recording. So the recording path is the where the XML file, where is your developer recording file saved in. Then the project path is that, so you can use our sample performance SDK sample solution come together with the performance SDK. By default, it's installed in your cloud host environment or in your Microsoft mentioned tier 1 box or downloadable with D. The only thing you need to be aware is that with a different tab environment, probably the location of the performance SDK is different. Well, the last parameter you enter in here is the performance SDK folder. So basically, you just pull in the performance SDK folder. For example, in my case, I use the cloud hosted environment. So the performance SDK will be in the K drive, and the folder I need to put in there is the performance SDK local directory. Okay. So once you enter all this value in there, you basically just come in here and say, hey, import. Once import is done, it will create a general folder, generate a folder under your performance SDK sample solution, and it will create this, the C# class based on your developer task, developer record. So with that, if you just want to run a single user testing, basically you can go to the task and then enable that task explorer, and then it will detect the test measure available in your current solution, and then you can simply come in here to click on, hey, I want to run the select test, and eventually you will see it will bring up the IE screen or Chrome. It depends on how you're going to set it in your cloud environment configuration, and you will see there's a pop-up screen, and eventually the single user task is going to walk through the step you record in the developer recording and replace in your current environment. So let's give it a few seconds. to start the execution. Okay, as you can see, it will open a new browser, and then it will link to your environment, and it will kick out the test step based on your developer record. Okay, so eventually it will complete the execution. As you can see previously, that it will show that this is complete, and then you can also see how long it takes to complete that particular scenario. Well, from a pure single user perspective, you probably will say, okay, they actually have a couple of different ways to achieve the same goal. Just think about from a single user. For example, you probably just want to record the scenario and replace it with the task record in the environment directory. Or you probably want to use that developer recording and use the regression suite automation tool and rerun the test. Then one of the advanced, if you use the performance SDK, is that probably if you have the single of the same process, but you want to test a bunch of the different data compilation, and that will going to result, leading some of the different behavior based on your code base. Then in this case, because you can first, edit the script itself and say, hey, reading the data and run the testing with a single of the process with the different of the data. And after you complete, you can identify, hey, whether is there any change you made so far in your dev environment is going to break any of the scenario based on different of the data compilation. Okay, so very soon it will complete the single user testing. Then we're going to first, as you can see right now, it already complete. It will close the browser. It will show you in total. It will take like 2 minutes to complete this scenario. Okay, then once you're done in here, then in the minimum level, you can understand, hey, my developer recording is fine. My single user test is fine. Then the next step is convert the single user to the multiple user and prepare for the load test. And before we move that, I forgot to mention previously that besides you convert the script, it also requires you to make some change in the dev environment. The first thing you need to change is that because from the single user testing perspective, we are using the browser to simulate the procedure. So if eventually behind the scene, it will require some of the Selenium's web drivers. So for the environment with the platform update 21 or above, you need to have the Selenium that's 3.13 version. Follows the environment with the below the platform update 20, then you need to go to the Selenium the 2.42 version. And once you download those the zip file, then eventually you need to copy the DLL file in there and one of the exe file and save it to under the Perform SDK common external Selenium's folder in there. And also you need to add a reference of the web driver DL to your Performance SDK sample solution as the one of the reference. Then another change need to happen in the cloud host environment configuration file is that if you go with the platform update 21st or above, by default we're shipping that configuration file and configure with the AAD authentication. But right now that feature is not yet GA. So what you need to do is that basically you need to open that cloud environment configuration file and then coming out the AAD portion as well as the keyboard's configuration portion. And also you need to make a change in the authentication part that to change the AAD authentication as the value you can see in here. So all these end-to-end of the and step-by-step instruction we already document. We are under the internal review, and very soon we're going to publish those step-by-step instruction in our doc website. Okay, so Right now, you complete a single user task. You want to convert a single user task to the multiple user as a load test. Then what you should do is that first of all, you need to first configure the dev environment and make it ready for the load test. The first step that you need to have the one of the environment variable add to your dev environment called is the test root, and you're going to point this environment variable to the Perform SDK folder. Okay, this is the first step. Then the second step in the platform update 21 and above, we are using the ODBC 17 version. So what you should do is that you need to download that 64 bits version of the ODBC version 17, and then you need to download that file and save it to the Visual Studio Online folder as this then in here. Okay, and then besides this step, you also, because as we mentioned right now, we are not ready for the AAD authentication. Then how can we authenticate across the environment? Because eventually the request is going to send either from your development environment in case you use your local tester controller, or from the Azure DevOps, right? So there's authentication need to be done across the environment. Then how that happen? We are going to rely on the certificates. So if you read our existing of the Perform SDK documentation, you will find a step that you need to use the make cert command to create a certificate. And basically, the one key information you need to be aware is that you need to make sure that CN name in there is the 127.0.0.1. That's the mandatory right now. After you generate the certificates, make sure you install them in the under the local machines personal store. And one thing you need to be aware is that for the environment with the platform update 21 and above, by default there is another of the certificate already installed in there with the same issuer. So you need to install the certificate you generate. And the next, in the following step, we also have the step that will request you to grab that sampling of the of the generated certificate. So make sure that you grab the same the red certificate sampling from the red certificate. Okay. Then once you complete the certificate generation, you also need to copy that certificate to the Perform SDK folder and make it present in here, because later if we use the Azure DevOps, we need to upload the certificate to the Azure DevOps. And the next one is that we need to make some change on the file present inside the Visual Studio Online folder. So basically there's two files you need to make change, and the file you need to make change is the setup command. You're going to use this replace the existing content with the content you can see in here again, because we're going to document step by step. Those information will present include in the documentation itself. And the second change that when you generate the certificate, you actually there's a step. So okay, you are not going to enter any of the password for your certificate. You are going to select run. So you need to remove this by default. There is the reference to the test certificate password in here. So basically you need to remove that reference and save the change in save the change you made against the files. Then the next one is that you need to go back to the Visual Studio and make sure you need to test. You need to change that testing architecture from the default value that's x86 to the x64. Okay. Then the next step you need to make the change is you need to go back to the cloud environment configuration basically because for the load testing, you are not going to test again the dev box any longer. You want to test again your performance testing environment. So you need to make sure that like host environment and host them is point to your performance testing environment. Then how you can find those information? Basically, you just go to any of the AOS environment in your performance testing environment, and then go to the manager and go to the AOS service, and then you go to that abandoned. Then you will find that 80, the port 80, then that's the host name. If you go to that 443, that's the SOAP host name. So you need to copy and then paste it back to your dev environment. Then the next change you need to make in the cloud environment configuration is that eventually you need to determine, hey, how many of the testing user you're going to create for load testing purpose. Let's say if you want to testing that the concurrent user 3,000, you probably want to create 3,000 of the testing user, or you probably just want to create 500 of the testing user, and then we use those users to eventually get the loads to have the 3,000 concurrent. Then besides you need to change the user count to reflect the number of the testing user you're going to create. Then to create a testing user, there's two of the different way. The first approach is that basically create a testing user under your tenant. Okay. In the second approach, we also provide a command line called create a user to allow you to create a user and import those user into your performance testing environment directly without creating under your tenant. Then the key difference is that if you create by command, those users not going to present under your tenant. You are not able to find, okay, what's the credential to, if you want to use those users to access the FNO environment. That's the one of the drawback. Well, if you use the real testing user under your tenant, you don't have that issue. But the issue is that you're going to create X number of the user under your tenant. Then whether that is a lot or it depends on the real scenario in your customer case. Then the next configuration you need to change to make sure, because eventually the load testing, the suite, we're going to look into the testing user and identify, hey, which user is the test user? So you need to make sure the user format can reflect your test user, okay? And the rest of the test is the rest of the change we already made during the single user test. So just skip it. Then the next one is that we're going to make the change to the online settings. So basically, there's some of the change you need to make in here is that you're going to say, hey, I'm going to run the testing with the local tester controller, or I'm going to run the against with the Azure DevOps. Then the difference is that if you run the local tester controller, then the testing agent is going to host in your local dev environment. Then because the dev environment probably, for example, in my case, I just provision is the D13 V2, then there's a limited spec available. Basically, there's a limited resource available. Then you probably will see that if you run the load testing, let's say with the 300 or 400 of the concurrent user, you will see the testing agent will going to consume that, for example, the CPU going to reach out the 99%. So you need to aware of that. Then if you go to the Azure DevOps, because it's a cloud service, it allows you to scale it and it can manage that scenario. For example, you want to run the test against the thousands of the concurrent users. So the first step, you need to choose, okay, which option you want to go. Then the second one is you're going to enable the testing, and also you're going to add some of the folder, add some of that certificate or cloud environment configuration file, and another of the integration of the configuration file, as well as the Visual Studio Online folder in here. Then you're going to make the change is that go to the hosting, and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to run the testing with the 64-bit process. Then there's another different later we will talk about when we describe the difference between the loader and the Azure DevOps. Then the difference is for the Azure DevOps, you need to first specify where is the setup script is. So basically, you just point it back to your Visual Studio Online folder setup commands, and it will upload the file under this folder, and it will first install as ODBC driver in there in order to issue the test request. And after that, if let's say you have multiple of the test script, so you probably doesn't like in my case, because I just for the demo purpose, I just have the single of the test script in here. In here, you probably have the multiple test script. Then eventually you need to come here to add the text mix. You want to say, hey, how many of user going to run, or how what's the percentage of the test is going to against a particular of the test scenario. And you can further play with the test mix model. So you can refer back the Visual Studio load test documentation to understand how to use the different test mix model available from the Visual Studio. Okay. But the key step in here that you need to add all your testing scenario you want to run it simultaneously in your test. Well, the next one is that you probably first want to say, hey, when you run the test, you want to simulate with the LAN or 3G or Wi-Fi. So it's based on your needs. And also you need to come to the run setting to say, hey, how long I'm going to run the testing, or how long the warm up will be, and how long the execution duration will be. So let's say you probably want to run, hey, I want to have these thousands of the user. I probably want to have the warm up that's 45 minutes or 1 hour. Or when you run the execution, you probably want to run it 1 hour, 2 hours. It depends on your scenario. Okay. Then once you complete the configuration, then in the dev box, then the next step is that you need to change the test script itself. So let me just quickly open one of them to walk you through quickly about how to what kind of change you need to make for each of the test C# test class you generate. The first one is that you need to add a user statement in here to show, okay, there's some of the UI helper, because just like the a single user test, you are not going to see that the browser is going to pop up. Basically, inside the memory, we're going to simulate how the user is interacting with the browser, at the payload against the AOS. This is the first step. Then the second step that you need to make the change to the test setup. So you need to add this statement in here, and also there's some of the coming out by default statement that is used for multiple user testing. So you need comment those statement, and also you need to comment out the default instance assigned to the client, because that's for the single user test. Then you need to first make a change in the testing cleanup measure in order to make a change like this. Then in the testing method itself, you probably want to make some first test. For example, by default, if you capture the scenario, you will enter the test value or test the data in there. It will capture it, and it will default. You try to use those the value you enter when you capture the scenario to run the test. Well, in your real case, you probably want to say, for example, if this is create a sales order, you probably want to say, I want to have the 100 of the customer available in there. I just want to randomly select one of the customer. If you change the customer, you want to first to say, hey, based on the customer I select, I probably want to randomly select a set of the item number. And you want to say, firstly, you want to say, I want to randomly set up some of the inventory location based on some of the rule. So you probably want to first make some change in your testing script to random your data. Then the second one is that you probably want to, from the what you try to simulate the user's behavior, right? From the user behavior perspective, when he or she try to perform some of activity in the system, he probably will get some of the interruption. For example, when you create a sales server, just create a enter the customer account in there, then somebody lock your door, then you want to talk to the person first before you go back, come back. So that means that you try to simulate that scenario. Then you probably want to say, I want to add some of the random posts in there. Then from our term perspective, is we call it, you probably want to add some sync time in there. Then you probably want to first render in those sync time. In this case, we don't. In my demo, I didn't add those changes. I just use the default of the value. There's no sync time at all. And firstly, you even want to, let me use another of the case sales order. Okay. From the performance testing perspective, in the first few of the iteration, you want to understand, hey, for load testing, which of the process probably is the potential of the bottleneck. Then you eventually will probably want to answer, hey, for example, in this case, basically I just create a sales order and confirm it. And most of the case, you probably say, I confirm the sales order probably is the slow process. Then how you can prove it? Basically, you want to see, hey, how long that particular of the step takes during the load test. Then what you can do is that you can add some of the timer score to capture how long that particular of the step takes during the load test. So basically, you add the begin and end the timer in there, and after you run the testing, you can pull out a report and prove whether this step is slow or actually there's another step slow. You probably want to do some tuning against it. So with that, you complete the change of your test script. You can build your solution. Then you're going to move to make some change in your perform test environment. Then the first step you need to make change is that you need to install the case you generate in the dev environment in the, under the local machine personal store in there. Then the second step that you need to make a change. Basically, you need to add the some print of the certificate you generate in the dev environment to the WF configure file. So you need to add under this authorities section. So this is the one I add for my demo purpose. Okay, and after you add the make the change, you need to also restart the AS to make sure it can AOS and other stuff can uptake the change. Then the next one will be that either you use the create user command to create the user in your perform test environment, or if you go with the real testing user, you just import those testing user. And you also probably want to assign the administration, system administration role, because you are not going to test against the security itself. All right. So with that, then basically mean that once you complete the sandbox environment, you complete the configuration in the dev environment, you complete the change against your core testing script, then you are ready to run the test. So basically, you just come in here to open the load test and make sure you have the load test mix or other configuration configured based on your needs, and then you come in here and then run the load test. Then in my case, by default, I use in the Azure DevOps in my current dev environment. But if you use the local test controller, it's also it will start to prepare it, and eventually it will start to run the load test. So once you start the load test, then immediately you want to start to monitor the testing itself. Then how you're going to monitoring, how you're going to troubleshooting, what kind of tool available. Then you can refer back our tech talk regarding that performance troubleshooting tools. Okay, then basically what you want to do is that you probably want to go to the environment monitoring in your performance testing environment and use the environment monitoring in there to monitor during your testing scenario how many of the how the CPU utilization how the DTU utilization looks like, or because in the this is a sandbox. If you want to capture the let's say you want to capture some of the CPU or you want to capture some of the memory utilization, then you can use the Windows tool that called a performance counter or some of the other tool. As long as you can use it or your favorites, then you can bring in and you can capture those the data in order to understand how the utilization look like. After the testing completes, basically you want to answer some of the question. Hey, in overall, how my DTU utilization look like? How my CPU utilization? So from CPU or memory perspective, performance counter can provide you the data. While from DTU perspective, if you just let's say if you just run 1 hour, then probably the environment monitoring right now you can go back for the 60 minutes, right? Then it should be fine. But if you run that for a few hours, then probably you need to use some of the query store, for example, the query in look like in here to pull out those DTU utilization during the load testing. But keep in mind is that from the query store perspective, it just keep the data for past 2 or 3 hours. So you need to make sure during your testing, you from time to time you need to come here to capture some of data for analyze in the later stage. And let's say you complete the testing and you want to identify whether is there any of some of the slow query, then you can go back to the query store, go back to the environment monitoring, use the skill set you have with the performance troubleshooting monitoring and the tool available in there to look into some of the data. For example, whether is there any of the snow query, who is the top resource consumption query, what's the execution plan looks like, some of the information like this. Or if you want to, in the first few of the iteration, you probably want to first capture some of the trace in order to do some of the trace analyze. Okay, there's a lot of things you can do in there. And eventually, the test itself will complete the execution. This one is still under the warm-up stage, but I do have some of the complete test case. So for example, this one, eventually, once you complete, this is the report you will get from the load testing from the Visual Studio. And you can first look into some of the graph, and you also report itself is going to tell you how in total how many of the computer user loads during your testing, how much test case been done in the per second during the execution stage. And also you can get a report for each of the click, for each of the enter value in there. So each of the step you will see in average the response times look like, and in total how many of the execution counts for that particular of the step. And back to those the DTU stuff, then you can even further come back some of the graph, use the data come up some of the graph like this, and you can also take advantage some of the, let's say you run the load test multiple times, then from the which still there's Excel report you can create, you can start multiple of the testing load testing, then you eventually it can generate a comparison report for you. And then you can see, hey, across the different of the load testing, whether is there any regression, then you probably want to first analyze why there's some of the regression happen on those areas. Okay, and similarly, previously we said we add some of the timer score. So with the report you can capture from the Visual Studio, you can see for particular of the insurance process, what's the average of the response time So that we're going to help you to understand, hey, whether those particular of the step, you need to spend more time to do the Turing, to do the trace, to do the first analyze, and eventually to add the incremental load for your next execution until you achieve your performance goal. So with that, the last thing I think I already covered. So, but I just let me just repeat it. So from the load testing, as I mentioned, there's two way you can run the load test with the local test or with the Azure DevOps. Then if you go to the Azure DevOps, there's another step you need to do is that you need to make sure that you connect your Visual Studio to your Azure DevOps. When you connect it, because right now if you look into the Azure DevOps, it basically, let's say, is the account and other stuff, right? But when you connect to it, make sure I don't have one of them opened. I think in this environment should have. Yeah. So when you connect to your Azure DevOps, make sure you use the old format of the Azure DevOps URL formatting. So basically, go to your Azure DevOps account .visualstudio.com. The reason that you need to go this way is because if you don't enter the connect your Azure DevOps in this way, then eventually when you run the load testing, it will tell you, hey, this is expecting to have the Azure DevOps, but you don't connect it. And besides that, you also need to click once. That's to open the open in Visual Studio from the dashboard of your Azure DevOps. Okay. Then after you open it, sometimes it will not open it as the administrator mode. Then you need to close it and then reopen it. Yep, basically that's all the things I want to demo. So then there's some of the tips and tricks I want to share as well. So the first thing is that you definitely need to, when you capture your scenario, you need to go through the scenario first to make sure you understand what's the step, where you're going to open the page, which button you're going to click, where you're going to enter the value. Do that first before you capture it. Then when you capture the screen, capture the scenario with the task record, do not go with those drop down. For example, if you want to enter the item number, do not select it from drop down. Instead, you capture the value and enter the value manually. The reason you need to do in this way, because if you capture from drop down, it will capture those activity, and eventually it's going to convert those activity as the test part of the test screen. Then it makes it difficult for you to, if you want to add some of the additional logic in there. Then from the single user and multiple user perspective, it's good if you can capture and keep another copy of the single user test screen available. Then whenever you want to make any change, you probably want to quickly run through a single user and capture some of trace and see, hey, what's the difference between your from the performance perspective, your previous run and the current run, and see whether this is the trend you want to see. Then from the workload perspective, as we mentioned, that you always need to add workload incrementally instead of go to your final target immediately. Then from the testing user perspective, because you will go through those validation, sometimes you probably need to use some of the test user to log in FNO and run a scenario and see, hey, whether is there any of the issue or whether it's then pop up and they're going to prevent the test executed during the load testing. Then in those cases, better you can have some real test user. You can understand what's the account, what's the credential, and eventually you can use those account log into the FNO and run some of the manual testing and validation with that particular account. Well, in your real testing use, in the final load testing, you probably want to go to the create user command, as probably you don't want to create thousands of the user under your AAD. Okay. So that's all I'm going to share in this session. Then Christopher, back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Can you hear me now? Or
Yep,
should
you
work,
sound
right?
great. Yep.
Perfect. So let's wrap up. On the approach, we have recapped the key points in a checklist fashion so that you can ask yourself the right questions if you have sufficiently studied the existing material. So for example, the tech talks that Jeff was mentioning on the tools, on the testing approach, on the different performance patterns, on the methodology itself. So how you have defined the scenarios, the starting data point, the preparation with the environment, and so on and so forth. So use that as a basis. And for the actual use of the Perf SDK, Jeff mentioned it already, but we know that the existing documentation on docs is a bit outdated. So this will be revamped to cover all those steps that are right now manual. And it will happen in the coming weeks. Additionally, as I said, some sample material that we showed at the beginning of the presentation will be attached to the Infopedia page. So you will be able to access that in a week or so. I just wanted to come back before we close the presentation on a question regarding the licensing requirements. So as we said, it's needed to have a tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 environment for the performance benchmark. So that would be considered a license. And it will be necessary to have a Visual Studio Enterprise license as well. And if you're going with the DevOps load tests, there may be additional needs there. So this closes the presentation. We hope really that it helped you to demystify the performance benchmark and to understand a bit more how the Perf SDK could be used. And hopefully it was useful to you. So feel free to share your feedback and any other questions, points that you would like us to cover in additional tech talks. Thanks a lot for your time. Back to you, Janice.
All right. Thank you, Christopher. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a brief moment here and bring your attention to a link that I posted in the Q&A panel. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, or you'd like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. Attendees can access the web conference recording by the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter team, Christopher and Jeff, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.